Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Elijah Magnier is here with us today to talk about the recent assassination in Iran and the possible shifting policies of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. This is a fully independent podcast. Lend your support at patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. Elijah Magnier and I talk about the recent assassination of a top Iranian scientist and the threats of retaliation proposed by hardline Iranian media, the precarious situation due to Trump likely leaving office soon, and Netanyahu's political troubles. We discuss the failure to withdraw U.S. troops from Iraq and the likely consequences of that, the prospects for rejoining the JCPOA Iran nuclear deal, and the things that could complicate that, the stronger influence of Russia and China in the region, and finally a bonus question about the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu near the end of his term. We recorded this on November 29th, 2020. Elijah Magnier is here, speaking to us from Europe. Hello, Elijah. It's great to talk with you again, and thank you very much for taking your time, particularly right now. Elijah is giving us some precious time, and I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you for having me again. I'm all yours.
Okay, well, the current news, we're going to talk a little bit about the, maybe shifting priorities in the Middle East and U.S. foreign policy, but we really need to address first the assassination of a head scientist, nuclear scientist in Iran, and the responses to that, which I'm seeing today, at least over here, Elijah, the news is that, I'll find you one from Fox News. It's, basically that in a hardline Iranian newspaper, there's an opinion piece written saying that Iran's previous responses to the suspected Israeli airstrikes didn't go far enough, and that Iran wants to attack the port city of Haifa and cause heavy human casualties. And they paint the person who wrote this opinion piece as someone close to the leadership in Iran. I don't know how true it is or how exaggerated it is, but I wanted to hear. Well, basically, can you tell us the story of this assassination? What happened?
Basically, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh is a very well-known scientist. He's in charge of the development of the nuclear capability and also the missile capability in Iran. He leads a team of scientists, highly expert in their field, and he supervises them like a general director who just makes sure that he's coordinating between the work. He has been on the list of Mossad target as former Prime Minister of Israel. Olmert said in 2018 that they wanted to assassinate him, but at the last moment, the decision was revoked. And basically, his presence and his assassination is not going to change anything at all. So what happened is we saw a very highly trained team of assassins who planted an IED, a car bomb, ahead of him, because every month he used to go and visit the family-in-law. And that is a road that he used to take almost every month. And he had bodyguards with him. And what happened is the car exploded in front of his vehicle, and suddenly on one side there were a team of 8 people who opened fire from a short, medium, and a short distance, killing everybody in the car. So he just was taken to hospital and died in hospital a minute later. This kind of attack is not done by amateur, and not only that, it requires a lot of training, particularly when this team of assassins are working on a very hostile ground where there are security forces a bit everywhere, and it's not easy to carry out such attack, and that attack needs a very high organization, not only by being able to hit the target immediately, but by buying vehicles that needs finance, buying explosive, buying weapons, and be trained to coordinate all the movement together. So this is not a decision that was born in one day or two, or 1 week or two. These people have been trained on this operation since quite some time.
So you said there were 8 people on the side of the car who opened fire after it was disabled by the explosion in front of it?
Yes, the 8 people just rushed to the scene. They were behind the car from a short distance, and as soon as the explosion took off, the car was stopped, and they were on the scene in a matter of seconds before the driver tried to react and leave the scene immediately. So he was immediately confronted by this team, the highly trained team, and blocked him and killed him and his bodyguard and his driver in the car.
Did they get away, the shooters?
So far, yes, they haven't been arrested.
Wow. Yeah, they were highly trained because, I mean, sounds like almost a suicide mission. Their chances of survival, it seems to me, aren't necessarily that high. So the response in this hardline newspaper, is that legitimate, or is that something that's being exaggerated by Fox News?
Which is, could you say that to me?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's an article in Fox News saying that an opinion piece in a hardline newspaper in Iran said that Iran, has not retaliated enough for previous assassinations, because these kinds of assassinations have been happening for a while. And they're saying that this time they need to really retaliate and attack the port of Haifa and, inflict heavy human casualties.
Yeah, well, that's wishful thinking, because you can't do that just to respond to a newspaper or tweet people on Twitter and social media. That's not something that it is very easy to say, but it's not very easy to do, because we saw that the Americans were prepared before the attack, so they knew about it. So Trump sent the US B-52s that were deployed to the Middle East. We saw that the USS Nimitz was ordered by Trump to return to the Persian Gulf. We saw that Trump said any attack on any US soldier in Iraq we will be faced with a devastating response. So the only thing that Trump is waiting for is to hit Iran and come out in his last 52 days saying, look what I have achieved, because a lot of people in many countries will be very happy to see Iran hit by the US army. Also, it's a very unique opportunity for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, to benefit from Trump in office. And he's not going to have someone who gives him so many gifts. And the only achievement that President Donald Trump has done in all his 4 years is only Israel, giving it the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, Jerusalem that belongs to the Palestinians, the increase of settlements, and he gave them money, weapons, and anything they have asked, they were given. That is the only achievement, and he topped it off by the normalization with the Gulf countries. Therefore, Netanyahu wants to do something in the last 52 days, but he can't go to war alone against Iran. He can't do that even against Hezbollah, who threatened to kill one Israeli soldier in exchange of the Israeli killing one Hezbollah militant. And since several months, all Israeli army has disappeared for 5 kilometers inland from the entire border, not able to respond to Hezbollah, because Hezbollah has imposed a rule of engagement and imposed a deterrence policy on Israel, and said, if you attack, we will immediately retaliate. The Israelis can see shipments of weapons transiting from Syria to Lebanon, unable to do anything because they are afraid of killing a Hezbollah on the way. So yes, the logic is that because Hezbollah is not a government, because Hezbollah doesn't have ministries, because Hezbollah doesn't have an infrastructure that Israel can go and destroy, or the US can go and destroy and cripple the country. That's why Hezbollah is an organization, is not a state, is not a state actor, is not a non-state or a quasi-state actor. It's an organization that acts as a resistance to stop Israel from violating the Lebanese sovereignty. Now, Iran can't do that because Iran doesn't have the military power and the capability of the United States of America, and Iran will not be facing Israel only in any war as long as Trump is in office, but will be facing America and the American army. And I don't think this is a time for Iran to be engaged in an all-out war, even if all its allies in the region, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Afghanistan will be involved. Still, the power of the US Army is much superior. So if Iran goes and bombs Haifa port, harbor, or the airport, or kill a target in Israel, now I don't think is appropriate, because this is the only thing Trump and Netanyahu want.
Right. And you mentioned that in your latest article, you mentioned that Iran is on an unprecedentedly high level of military readiness, including all of its allies and the resistance forces. So, I mean, I think it's just logical. I know I personally have always been worried about the last months of the Trump administration, whether he won or not. I think that, well, I mean, it kind of looks like his loss was almost guaranteed. But I was always worried that these last few months that there would be such pressure on him, either to keep the support of powerful people, pro-Israel, and people in Israel, or just to, as an insurance policy almost, just in case I lose, I better get this done. And now it becomes even more risky because now he's got, just a number of weeks, a short number of weeks left. And I'm not surprised that Iran is on a high level, a high alert for attack, even though he's also, seriously weakened by having lost the election. So, do you want to talk a little bit more about that, about the high level of military readiness? You already did just talk about it a little bit in just now, but maybe you have some more to say on that.
Well, the Iran and the axis of the resistance were aware that Trump is trying to do something, because he's extremely upset about the rejection of Iran to meet him and to come to the negotiation table. And he believes that Iran was one of the contributors of his failure, because it didn't manage to achieve anything in favor of the US administration or the US people. So he wants America to be great again. The only thing he has managed to do is to earn so many enemies around the globe and to satisfy what Israel wants. So the Iranians and the axis of the resistance were aware that Trump is going to try to do something, and that this hit will come from Netanyahu, who likes to do it, not only because he likes it, but also because he is in deep trouble domestically.
Right.
He wants to register some achievement. He is accused of being corrupted, of bribery. His defense minister, Benny Gantz, he formed a committee to dig into the deal of the submarine and the missiles that amount to more or less $2 billion, $1.5 billion for the submarine and $460 million for the missiles. And there are manifestations in front of his house every single day since ages. So Netanyahu wants to do something, and the only thing he can do, as I explained earlier, is not against Lebanon because he's afraid of Hezbollah's retaliation. Against Syria, he's doing it, but he's really achieving nothing. And people started to wonder why he's spending so much money on bombs, throwing them on Syrian position when he's not achieving anything, neither tactically nor strategically. In Iraq, he can no longer do it because the Americans received a warning from the Iraqis that any allowance, so the Americans allowed the Israelis to bomb Iraqi positions last year, and the Iraqis said they would retaliate against US forces. So that also finished. And there's nothing remained but go to an unlawful act that is the assassination of a civilian non-combatant, which is the Iranian nuclear scientist. Israel has assassinated 4 before Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. It is not the first time. Since 2010, they have assassinated many scientists. They assassinated many Iraqi scientists before that, during Saddam Hussein era. So that was the only possibility they have envisaged, and they figured out, and they said, well, there will be something done by Israel. We don't know what it is, but they are all on high alert. They were, and they still are until today, and they will continue to be in the next 52 days.
Now, at the end of that article, you say Israel is in a position to lead the defense of the Gulf. I found that very interesting. What did you mean by that?
It means exactly what I said. So let's take a little bit the visit of Netanyahu to Saudi Arabia at the beginning of this week. Netanyahu went to Saudi Arabia and did it on purpose. First, not to switch off the GPS of his flight, so everybody can see a flight leaving from Israel and landing in Saudi Arabia on the Red Sea. Second, to make sure that everybody have seen that, he leaked the information and everybody started to talk about such a visit. Third, he allowed the military to lift the censorship on the news and the information, because as I don't know if you are aware, nothing can be leaked in Israel without the approval of the military, and there is a military censorship on any information related to the security or the army or any sensitive information. So there is no freedom of press as we think it is. So the Israeli allowed the leak of this information, and many of the same Netanyahu cabinet confirmed the visit. Now, why do we think Netanyahu would be wanting to leak this information? Is it because he wants to show off that he's visiting Saudi Arabia, or there is a relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel? Well, that's an old news, because in 2014, the former Mossad chief Tamir Pardo visited Riyadh. In 2016, Anwar Eshki, the Saudi retired general, visited Tel Aviv. There are visits between the two countries, between Israel and Saudi Arabia, on a very regular basis. We saw also the Saudi spy chief, Khalid bin Ali Al-Hamaidan, who visited Saudi Arabia, who visited Israel in 2017. So, in my opinion, the reason why Netanyahu released this information is really to hit Saudi Arabia below the belt. and say to Iran, Saudi Arabia is partner in this hit, and I went there to talk about the possibility of retaliation of Iran, and for you to understand that I'm not alone. And if you want to hit any objective, and your banker's objective, make sure that you include Saudi Arabia and not only me, if you want to retaliate to the assassination of your nuclear scientist. That is what I understand.
Right. Because, after the attack on the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, it seemed like it was a good deterrence, right? It was, this is what's going to happen to you if you attack us. We're going to hit the Gulf countries. So it still seems pretty risky. Like, how confident are the Gulf countries in Netanyahu and the U.S. ability to prevent another attack like that?
Well, nobody can prevent attack by precision missile in this way launched from Yemen, because these missiles fly very low and no radar can spot them and intercept them. So why the Yemeni are hitting Saudi Arabia in the place where it hurts the most? Because it doesn't hurt only Saudi Arabia, because it hurts also the Americans, because hitting oil facilities in Saudi Arabia is diminishing the reserve of money and wealth of the Saudis to the point that no longer have enough money to go and buy weapons to bomb Yemen, and or weapons to buy the support of the United States of America, or to invest it in Israel with the Israelis, but to look after their domestic economy.
Right.
By crippling the Saudi capability to have an abundance of wealth and hitting them in the oil production, the only thing they generate money from, it hits actually many birds in one stone.
Yeah, I mean that is the way it looks to me, and then of course we have the situation where we've still got troops in Iraq, right? So they are clearly they'll be the target. That's been proven already. So, if some kind of attack was carried out on Iran, Iran has already shown what they can and are willing to do in retaliation. Now, Trump made an effort to, it seems like he made an effort to pull the troops out of Iraq. And you explain in your other article what the current situation is between Iraq and the United States and Iran, where we had promised to remove forces. Iran's relationship with Iraq is really something very important to that relationship, is the agreement to get the U.S. troops out of Iraq. And you mentioned in another article about, a visit over the summer. The prime minister from Iraq traveled to Iran, and then a more recent conversation where they said that Trump is no longer in a position to keep the promise to withdraw the troops. So how does that play into all of this?
I think the Iraqi resistance never believed that Trump is going to withdraw the troops from Iraq. Iran also never believed that Trump is going to pull out from Iraq. No occupation forces pull out without being hit and understand the price of staying in a country where it is unwanted. And I don't think it's good for the Iraqis to see the American forces leaving without really forcing them to leave. Otherwise, they will return, or they will be in the country for a very long period of time. So the Iraqis in the parliament, legally, they issue a decree. They voted for the withdrawal of all the American forces. And the American administration is rejecting this request from the parliament. That is a legitimate request from a sovereign country. That gives the right for all the Iraqis to attack the Americans in the country. Is the American people aware of the situation? Do the American people know that they are unwanted in Iraq, that is around 9,500 kilometers away from home? What are they doing in Iraq to protect the safety of the American in the United States of America from Mesopotamia or from the Levant? How they are looking after the Americans' interest from Iraq? People don't want them in the country. They just are unwanted. They just need to leave. And they're not going to leave unless they are attacked. And once they are attacked, then they will mount propaganda how they are under terrorist attack and how there is an insurgency financed by Iran and how the Iraqis are so bad because they come to support them and they want them out and they are killing their troops.
Right. It is a gridlock kind of situation. I mean, for what we know over here, Americans have opposed a presence in Iraq and Afghanistan. Not only oppose a presence there, I mean, they want the troops removed from there, but they also say now, even military veterans say that, and by a large percentage, Elijah, like 70%, that it was never worth fighting that war. So I can't imagine that anybody wants, or not many people anyway, wants to keep troops there. I think most of us are saying just pull them out. Trump knows this, which is why he made the gesture, which may have been a sincere gesture to try to remove the troops. But he clearly had people in the Pentagon defying that, which is why he got rid of the Secretary of Defense right after the election and put somebody in there who's more who wants to pull troops, especially out of Afghanistan. Yeah. But I don't think, I just think they're gonna, as people here call it, they're just gonna slow walk them. They're gonna, put up barriers. They only have to do it for a few weeks. And removing 500 out of 3,000 is such a token. Maybe he'll be able to show some video of some soldiers coming home for Christmas, and I'm glad they will be able to. But as far as I know, they could easily just redeploy or even up those numbers. I don't think any of the infrastructure has changed or the situation has changed significantly.
Well, look, Joanne, we need to be careful when we listen to what Trump is saying, because he said many times, I want to pull out from Syria. And then he said, I want the oil, I'm staying. And then we saw the US envoy to Syria saying, we lied on Trump and we told him there are 200 troops and there are over 900. Did he lie on Trump, or this is what he's telling us? Can he lie on Trump? Can he lie on his president? So there's a very fine line here when we say Trump wants to troop out, but he is trying. No. In the United States, you have Secretary of State and you have Secretary of Defense. You have secretary because the decision is ultimately to the president. And if the president wants to pull out, there is no force on earth that would force him to pull out. We saw how Barack Obama signed the nuclear deal in 2015 when half of America intelligentsia stood against him, and newspapers wrote thousands of articles condemning Obama's act. The Israelis were furiously against him, and he signed the deal and he went to it. So this is a decision of the President of the United States and not a decision of the Secretary of Defense. And if he wants to pull out from Iraq, he promised that he's going to pull out from Iraq. The United Nations representative in Iraq made a deal with the Iraqis, giving her word that was given by the Americans that the United States of America will pull the troops from the country by the 30th of November. Now that is in one day. That's tomorrow. It's not going to happen.
Right. And you mentioned that that Iran and the various Iraqi militias had put a truce on until the end of November to give him the chance to follow through on that promise.
Yes.
But that ends tomorrow as well, right?
Yeah, that was the deal. The deal was to wait until the 30th of December of November to abide by the commitment and the word they have given to the United Nations. And this agreement was violated by the Americans. Now the Americans, well, basically the Americans don't care really if they violate the deal or they don't keep their word by pulling out from the country. But at least the Iranians can say, we've done everything we could to honor our commitment. Are you going to honor yours? Obviously not.
So back to the potential for an attack on Iran. You mentioned that for Netanyahu, as you just said a little bit earlier, politically, it would be beneficial to him, he thinks, because he's got protests, at his doorstep every day, and he's in big trouble. Um, but also, you mentioned that he may be trying to cripple any attempt by the Biden administration to re enter the JCPOA. You mentioned that Iran is not willing to renegotiate the JCPOA, that the offer on the table from them is, we'll talk to you, but, we're not going to get the bigger, better deal or whatever was the goal. You can either come back into abide by the agreement or not. And they're also putting pressure on Europe, who, what I think you mentioned, 3 months they have to make a solid decision. So, what are your thoughts there on Netanyahu's potential motivation to mess things up so badly that the Biden administration will not be able to do anything to improve the JCPOA deal?
Netanyahu is really counting on Iran to react and to hit back. And by hitting back, there will be a kind of a war in the Middle East. So can you imagine in 50 days, in 52 days, Joe Biden arriving to the presidency and in the midst of a war, he wants to sign back the nuclear deal with Iran? That's impossible. Therefore, Netanyahu is really doing everything in his power and will continue to do everything in his power in the next 50 days and will try to attack even more to make sure that Iran has no choice but to react. On the other side, Iran is aware of that. That's why Iran is not responding to newspapers, even Iranian newspapers, who are saying you should attack. Now, it is not here, we're not to satisfy opinions, but to weigh the consequences on the entire country and the future consequences. Now, Iran has moved from something to do something else completely different, which is also equally important. According to the JCPOA, Iran is entitled to stockpile 300 kilograms of enriched uranium. It has reached 2,442.9 kilograms and is going to continue the enrichment to 20%, which is the most difficult part, from 5 to 20. And then from 20 to 90, that becomes much easier. By reaching 20%, this is what the level Iran reached in 2015 when they sat with Barack Obama. Now, if Joe Biden reached the presidency and he tries to fiddle with the nuclear deal, he will only be satisfying the Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, who never approved really from his heart the nuclear deal, but allowed Zarif to do it because he always said to Zarif, you will never manage to get it through because you can't trust the Americans or the Europeans. And if Joe Biden is going to say, well, I need few more months to think about it and to sort out my problem with China first and my problem with Russia, and my relationship with Europe, Iran will say, take all the time in the world, we're going ahead.
And they're actually saying we will develop a nuclear weapon that fits on a missile?
No, they are saying we will go to the full nuclear capacity. Nuclear weapon is a detail. When they have a full nuclear capacity, they can do anything they want. But today, having a nuclear weapon is no longer something that one can feel powerful about. If you have the full nuclear capacity, you can do a nuclear weapon anytime. But to have the full nuclear capacity will make people think twice before attacking you and pushing you toward the nuclear bomb. That's the difference. And having today ballistic missiles, precision missiles, and wing missiles that can hit anywhere, any target, and any base in case of war. I mean, look, when the US sends a carrier like the USS Nimitz to the Gulf, do you think the 5,000 men on board or 90 aircraft are going to scare Iran? For Iran, Iran maybe need 4 or 5 of Yakont missile that can destroy the entire fleet. This is not the point. These are sitting ducks in front of the Iranian missiles. So there is a potentiality that is different from the nuclear bomb to defend oneself. And this is what Iran is saying.
Yeah, putting a carrier in the Gulf is not what it used to be. I mean, they'll be close. They could launch weapons quickly. They could definitely do some damage to Iran, but they can't get out of there fast enough to get out of range of, Iranian missiles, which are better, more accurate, and go further now. Is that just the basics of it?
Well, look, let's be honest about it. The United States can create huge damage in Iran, but the United States has dozens of military bases around Iran. They are surrounding Iran, but they are also targets for Iran. And Iran has thousands of missiles. Now, Iran has been used to the war. During the Iran-Iraq war, there are hundreds of thousands who were killed and wounded in the war. These countries like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, they're people who lived in a war for so many years. Now, are the Americans capable of accepting that, let's say, 10 military bases around them all hit by precision missile like Ain al-Assad? Now, in Ain al-Assad, let's be also frank, the Iranians didn't want to create real damage. Otherwise, they would not send to the Swiss embassy 5 hours before saying, this is what we are going to hit, and these are the positions that we are going to hit precisely at this particular hour. And the Americans responded, if you hit, we're going to hit you back. And they said, we are ready. And they hit, the Americans didn't hit back. Now, in case of war, this is not going to happen. In case of war, the Americans are going to destroy tens of targets in Iran, that's for sure. But there are hundreds of silos under the ground with missiles that can be launched against US bases. And the US know that. So there will be damage on both sides. Now, how much one side can take damages, more than the other or less than the other, that is arguable.
Yeah. So why are they doing all this? I mean, the situation hasn't changed. Is this all for show?
Well, unfortunately, the Americans are very intelligent people, but they've stopped using their intelligence. They're using their muscles. And they see we have a huge army. We can do everything. Like General Wesley Clark said, we have a big army. We don't know what to do with it. So let us invade 6 countries. So this is how the Americans are thinking. So when Trump moves to office and he said, I went to the Pentagon and I saw so many televisions scream, wow, never seen this before in my life. I mean, this is the president of the United States who is impressed by so many television. He can go to any television shop and they will have so many screens all put together. Now, this is not the way you deal with countries. This is not the foreign policy that you can run. This is not how we can earn allies and friends, or you can make deals. If you don't want to have friends and allies, at least you don't enemies. You don't think that because you have missiles and you have carriers and you have jets, you can go and bomb everywhere. Well, regardless the size of your opponent, it's going to hit you back.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the explanation that this is being done for Netanyahu for political reasons makes the most sense. I mean, what about though? What about the Soleimani assassination and now this assassination? The hardliners in Iran have to be passed. They have to be um, satisfied in some way. Is that true? And I feel like I always figured there would be a retaliation for the Soleimani assassination. Uh, what do you think about that? Do you think it will be done? Do you think it has been done? Because it doesn't seem so. It seems like this is something that is still to be reckoned. There's a reckoning coming for that.
Well, you see, countries like Iran don't think like the United States of America. The United States of America has the power to say, if you kill one soldier, we're going to bomb you. In Iran, it's different. Iran thinks about constructing the country and becoming more powerful and standing on its own feet, particularly since 1979, with the first decree of President Carter. He started the sanctions on Iran. So in Iran, there is a thinking not only among the hardliner, but also among the moderate. They're all the same. This is a country, and the general is killed. He was a guest, and he arrived in Iraq, and is up to the Iraqi to do it. The Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei said, "We are not going to rest until we see the American forces out of West Asia." Now that is the revenge. It's not to go and kill an American officer or a commander. No, it is not like that. It's not a tit for tat on this level. Now, the Americans have tried to divide Iraq and they failed. That's a revenge. They tried to submit the poorest country in the Middle East, inflicting so much damage, creating the largest humanitarian crisis in the world in Yemen, and they're not managing to submit Yemen. They tried to divide Syria and they failed. That's also a victory. They tried to submit Lebanon and they are failing, and the Israeli army disappeared from all the borders, the strongest army in the Middle East. That's also an achievement. These are the achievements. It is not you kill one officer, I kill another officer. Well, let's sum it up at the end of the day and see what have you managed to do and what I have managed to do. Now, I can tell you in a few words. The Americans is a superpower and the strongest country in the world. That for sure. It's stronger than the Russian, is stronger than the Chinese. Has the stronger country in the world, a superpower, managed to submit a small, tiny country like Syria with less than 30 million inhabitants, like Iraq with 26 million? It's so small. 80 countries from all over the world gathered against Syria. So many countries want to divide Iraq. They haven't succeeded. So many countries try to impose on Lebanon to draw the line on the borders with Israel, how Israel wanted. They haven't succeeded. And these are the most powerful superpower countries in the world, the Americans and the European continent. And they haven't succeeded. Iran was in Iran and had one ally, Hezbollah. Now, thanks to the Americans and the Europeans, they have a second ally, that is Syria, a strategic ally where they have a very strong base. They have a very strong ally, not only the Popular Mobilization Forces, but also other groups in Iraq. And they have another strong ally in Yemen. So the Iranians are wondering today where the American can go first so we can earn more allies.
Yeah. Now, with the Biden administration coming in, they basically brought back the same foreign policy team that Hillary Clinton had planned to hire. They laid out their plans a number of times during the latter years of the Obama administration, and especially before the election. They laid out like they really want to change the outcome of the Syrian war, which, as I often say, that may not go down in history as one of the most significant wars in modern history, but it really is. The more you know about it, the more you realize, because some of the things you just explained. But even if Biden brings back this team and they're going to try to pick up the ball where it was at the end of 2016, a lot has changed since then. And you go into that and you talk about, and this surprised me. You wrote that Russia has a presence in Iraq as well. Of course, we know they're in Syria. You say that they have a stronger force in the Middle East now than they did while they were the Soviet Union. I didn't realize that. So they have even. Do you mean they have even more military there, or they have even more influence?
Well, so what was your question? Sorry.
So the question is, Biden has brought in this team, and they seem to want to resurrect their plans from 2016. But things have changed a lot since then, particularly around Russia and China and what they've been doing in the Middle East. And you mentioned that Russia's presence in Iraq is even strong. It's Russia's force in the Middle East, is even stronger than it was when they, during the Soviet Union.
Yes, because in 2011, Russia was sleeping. This is why the Americans and the Europeans managed to attack Libya and create this havoc in Libya. And until 2015, the Russians were still a bit dormant, and the Americans evaluated that the Russians will be able to re-enter the international arena in 2021 or 2022. So they've done everything in their power to stop that, starting by the war in Syria. Now, We're not going to go through the war in Syria because this is such a vast topic, but we can go very quickly on it. By Assad refusing the gas to go through Qatar, from Qatar through Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Europe, that was a hit to the Russian to prevent the Russian gas to Europe. And by preventing the Russian gas to Europe, Russia will be even more weak and unable to stand on its feet in 2021. So everything was done to delay the waking up of the Russian. But in 2015, when the Russian realized that their base is in crisis and their base, there is a risk to remove their naval base on the Mediterranean, because that was also one of the plan of the Americans to kick out Russia from the Levant, then they decided to go into the Syrian war. And it took them several years to realize that the Americans really don't want them there. And the Americans consider Russia as the enemy, and they have never stopped considering Russia as the enemy. And Russia, with President Putin and his foreign minister, tried to talk to the Americans and tried to reach agreement. And they were not fully aware that the Americans want them completely out. So yes, Russia now understood, is fully engaged. It is present in northeast and Syria, where the Americans are operating. That is a mismanagement from the Pentagon side, and that is to the benefit of Syria. And Russia is stronger and expanding and is present in Iraq and is present in other parts of the Middle East and is establishing a naval base in Sudan.
And then we have China. The sort of Iran has been quietly advancing deals and the development of a port with China. Regardless of sanctions, it gives them more ability to work around the sanctions. And you know, so you have that situation too.
Yes, Iran signed a deal with um, China that is a $400 billion deal to develop its harbors, communication, trains, railway, energy, everything. And that is a strategic deal because Iran is looking toward Asia and no longer toward Europe because Europe failed to honor its commitment with the JCPOA, the nuclear deal. And for that, Iran decided that there's no hope from the European continent because it will always be a kind of a follower to the United States. And the Europeans still have this psychological problem of the Second World War, where the Americans came to help them. And they were paid handsomely for that at the end of the day. And still, until very recently, Europe was paying all the American involvement in Europe during the Second World War. So now it's time to look toward China and toward Russia, and this is what the Iranians are doing. So they're developing two harbors, not in the Strait of Hormuz. In case of war, they will have their harbors blocked. Now they can have it open completely. They can sell their oil. They can do business with the Chinese. They can do business with the Russians without the need to lose their sovereignty and no longer look toward European and give the European the time to find their way out of the US dominance and perhaps find another US president that is willing no longer to go to war, but to think about peace from time to time.
And that's something that is not talked about as much here in the United States. The deals between Iran and China, which is interesting. Um, I wonder about that.
Well, let me comment on this small detail. The reason why it is because this is one of the failure of the United States policy in the Middle East. Why Iran would sign a 400 billion deal with China, not with the United States of America, is because the United States of America declared war on Iran. Why you don't declare a partnership in business partnership? You don't need to be friends. Just go and do business. But no, you want to impose sanctions. You want to continue your sanctions. You want to impose sanctions on banks, on anything that is moving inside Iran and outside Iran. You try to cripple the country, and you haven't learned your lesson that since 1979, Iran did not submit and will not submit. So for God's sake, sit around the table, make deal like Obama understood finally that all his attempts are going to fail, and it's better to make a deal with Iran and then sign contracts. And this is what the Iranians did. They signed contract with the European and with the Americans, and poof, suddenly Trump arrives and put everything in the air.
Yeah. And the distrust of getting back into or any changes to the JCPOA, any renegotiations, it's not just towards Trump, right? There have also been statements about how you can't trust. It's sort of uh, the deeper feeling of you can't trust Americans in any deal with Iran extends. It's not like when Biden comes in, they're suddenly going to have a lot of trust in him. Is that true?
Yeah, there's no need for trust here. There is a deal, abide by the deal. We don't need to trust each other. We need to respect what we have signed for. And then that's it. This is all what you are asked for.
Just a transactional relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, just a business deal. There's no reason to trust.
All right. So if you don't mind, I'd like to move on to the bonus question. It's a little more political, a broader question. Anything else that you want to say before we move on to that?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Okay. All right. Here's the bonus question. So in the 2020 election, it seems like Netanyahu and at least some part of the Israeli establishment turned on Trump. Like, why did that happen? Did they not get what they wanted from Trump? Was there a falling out? Or did they realize that he was up against a force that was never going to allow him to win re-election?
I don't think the Israelis turned against Trump at a certain point.
Interesting. Because that's kind of the vibe here.
Trump gave the Israelis everything they wanted.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it seemed to me. But Netanyahu wouldn't endorse him.
Right. Yes, I understand that. Okay, so I understand where you're coming from. The Jewish community in the United States is mainly Democrat, is not Republican. And regardless Netanyahu endorsement or not, the majority of the Jewish community in America will not vote Republican. And Trump did everything. Israel can never, ever dream of a president like Trump. So the Israelis tried their best, but I don't think the Jewish community will listen to Israel in this particular political choice, mainly when Trump showed his incapability of ruling on the United States and look after the interest of the United States of America.
Yeah. So on some issues, it doesn't really matter what political party the pro-Israel Americans are. You know, they will always support certain policies. But in elections, as you say, I think that I think Trump got more than usual votes from the Jewish Americans and pro-Israel Americans, but yeah, I don't think enough to make that big a difference. So you don't think there really was a falling out between Trump and Netanyahu?
No, I don't think so. Not at all.
Interesting, because it looks that way from this part. But Netanyahu can see the writing on the wall, and he's in a precarious situation himself. So that would even sort of reinforce your thoughts about him trying to take what little time is left to use it to his own political advantage and to, sabotage to some extent Biden's chances for resuming or, getting back into the JCPOA deal or changing it favorably for Israel and the people who opposed it here. I would guess that would be, well, I hope so anyway. I hope it doesn't turn out to be that someone doesn't trigger something worse, because there are a lot of places where it could be triggered, and there are a lot of places where bad things would happen if it did get triggered. It would be like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all I got. I really appreciate your time. I'll post links to all of your recent articles, and wish you well on your trip. And I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Joanne.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Elijah Magnier. Follow Elijah on Twitter at EJMAlRai. Find and support his work at ejmagnier.com. And there's a donate button at the bottom of the page to help support his work. This podcast, independent media. Listener support's important. Patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire. PayPal.me/AroundTheEmpirePod. You can find the podcast on any mobile podcast app, on the website AroundTheEmpire.com, on Patreon, on YouTube. And if you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Follow on Twitter at AroundTheEmpire. And we'll see you next time. Happy holidays and take care, everyone.